what will they look back on? How will they know you were there? Like what change will you made, and maybe legacy is a word you're okay using. What will be your legacy when you're no longer in that job? And to me, if you're a person who's just kind of managed the status quo, I don't think there's a lot of credit you're going to get for that. I don't think there's a lot of reward you're going to get for that. I think you'll keep your job, and that might be enough for some part of that bell curve. But I think the joy comes from, you know, taking a swing, trying to create something new. Those heroes that you talked about in your question, Lee, thank heavens for them because they realize things are broken and they're really ready to experiment.
Welcome to Broken Benefits. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and this is a podcast where we learn from top employer experts on how to fix our broken benefits to save lives, save dollars, and save your talent. Welcome everyone back to Broken Benefits. So excited about today's guest, Kevin Cox. Kevin is a phenomenon among really the industry. He's known as the dean of CHROs. He's been the director at multiple different companies. He's worked in 3 different industries. He's been a CHRO for 3 different global multinational leading brands. He's been the CHRO at Pepsi, American Express, and most recently at GE. And perhaps most notably within the context of what we do here on the podcast is he is the visionary founder of the Health Transformation Alliance, or HTA, which happens to also be where I work. He's one of the most consequential professionals in American healthcare and has had a tremendous impact on the industry, coming from a position where we don't always see an enormous amount of innovation within the CHRO role. And so we're so lucky to have him. Thank you, Kevin, so much for joining us today.
Hey, Lee, thanks for having me. And the standard for an introduction is whether my 91-year-old mother, who I just visited with this weekend, would be pleased with that. And you killed it. So it's my pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
No, that's wonderful. So, Kevin, many people, both listeners on this podcast and generally, don't necessarily know that most employer healthcare expense rolls into HR leaders. They might otherwise think, oh, well, the CEO is in charge of it, right? Or maybe the CFO because it's a lot of money. But that doesn't, maybe the buck stops there. But ultimately, CHROs are responsible for this area. But we rarely see CHROs active in healthcare. Can you tell us a little bit about how the experiences in your career made you a little different?
Well, unfortunately, Lee, I think your premise is right. I agree with it. It's kind of always been a little bit of a head scratcher to me why the by far the largest line item in an HR budget is going to be employer provided health care. And you're right, it's a big country. There may be companies where CFOs look after that or some shared service executive looks after that. But I think largely it does fall under the CHRO. And I think that the reason that I can only tell you about the reason I chose to care about it. I've always believed the role of the head of HR is to be an advocate. Without question, there are 3 stakeholders. I've been kind of a balanced scorecard guy for a long time. So, what's right for the shareholder if you're owned by others? What's right for your customers? We all have to and should think harder about that. And what's right for the employees? And it's easy to get kind of pulled into what's right for the shareholder and the customer because they're unrelenting. And a lot of times employees don't really have a voice that we hear as clearly as we need to. So to me, if I believe my role is to be an advocate for employee concerns, employee questions, et cetera, how can I not care about something that I think is so elemental to the employee value proposition? We all have, partners, wives, children, mothers, and you don't have to spend very long around the dinner table to understand healthcare is a big, big subject for people, and they look to their companies to be their Sherpa in something like that. They look to their company to be the provider of something like that, and when it goes poorly, they think that's our fault, and I accept that premise. So to me, that's what got me to think about this in a bigger way.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Oh, I heard you got off social media.
Yeah, actually, it was just kind of depressing.
Did you know that 1 in 3 fundraisers on GoFundMe are for medical bills? And many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
Thinking a little deeper on that, what were the problems that you observed in healthcare that you wanted to address, and what might be the difference in the way you thought about that relative to other CHROs? I mean, you brought up that taking care of people and advocating is the key part of the role, and healthcare is key to taking care of people. I think there are lots of CHROs who would argue that they feel similarly, but they don't necessarily take any interest in healthcare, or if they do have that interest, we don't see them sort of more on the front lines. And so maybe blending together a little bit about what separated you there that brought you more into the fray, and how you address those problems.
Well, just lest we be overly hard on CHROs. Um, I was involved in another conversation not too long ago. CHRO jobs have always been tough. I believe they're getting tougher. So it's often that not that they don't care, it's that they perhaps care about something else more, clear and present danger kind of stuff, and things that their CEOs are pushing them on, things that their boards of directors are pushing them on, are also very large subjects. And so I think this can kind of get pushed down the list.
Mm.
If I'm going to sort of play a little bit of a role of historian of the HTA, I got to take you back to 2015, um, 2014 when this was started. And I had a context that does not exist today that was a huge accelerator to this thinking. I had a couple contexts. So, first of all, Lee, the Affordable Care Act, or what people have sort of begun to call Obamacare, was very, very big in the U.S. Political landscape, and for the first time, I don't know, maybe since World War II, employers were having to think about, what do I want to do with healthcare in the big picture, not deductibles and caps and things like that, but do we even want to be in the healthcare business at
Yeah.
all? Should we let the government kind of handle that for us and let us focus on making light bulbs or engines or whatever we might do? And that conversation hadn't been even possible for decades. So I had that context, and I had a lot of CHROs having to either double down on a point of view that said, look, healthcare is a big part of our employee value proposition. No way am I going to kind of take my hand off the steering wheel there. And I had other respected CHROs saying, this is my moment. What I want to do is sort of service our customers, and benefits will be maybe kind of a even Steven, kind of equally uh, contributed through the Affordable Care Act or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. That context raised this subject way up the list of things heads of HR care about. It's not the case so much today. So I had that context, and I was a proud member through my company of the HR Policy Association, or HRPA. Um, I believe one of the premier, if not the premier, gatherers of heads of HR.
Yeah.
It was mostly a policy influencing or a lobbying organization, and it was therefore very involved in working with federal officials about the shape of what healthcare could look like. So I had a captive audience. I had a group of 400 or so heads of HR who were coming to these discussions and meetings very interested in another way. And so those are two really big assets, I think, or pieces of context that spawned the birth of the HTA.
As you were looking at healthcare, you were looking at this new landscape, you landed on the side of, okay, we need to double down. I love that. that concept of, hey, there's a line in the sand. Do we want to continue like since since World War II to offer this, or do we want to start looking at ways to restructure? You firmly landed in the, well, this is part of what we do. What then became the focus of, okay, what needs to change?
I think that what we have known for a long time, probably since it all began, is that interests are not terribly well aligned. Let's just cut to the chase. Interests are
Mhm.
quite poorly aligned. If the U.S. healthcare system was a patient, it would seriously need a chiropractor. I mean, we've got things way out of alignment there, and that's been known by many for a while. If you have time or your interest, we can talk about why we think that is. But misalignment of interests is really the big problem that I believe we're still attempting to solve as it relates to healthcare. Not saying anybody's doing anything wrong or bad or even irrational. I'm just saying that the outcomes that various parties in the healthcare food chain pursue are just not well aligned with one another. And so that's what the HTA was born to tackle. And
Mm,
I've said before, and again, you were really kind with your introduction of me, but I still think for all the things I might have done over this 35-year career I've had in HR, I think the HTA is the most important thing I've done or I will ever do. It's that big to me. It's that broken. It's touches that many millions of Americans. And where else do you get a chance to take on something that awesome and that full of possibility?
so as you were thinking about the need to start realigning incentives across the entire country, I'm assuming you realize, wow, we're going to need a lot of people. Nobody can do this alone.
We're going to
And
need a bigger boat, as they said
yeah,
in
we're going
Jaws, right? Yeah, yeah.
to. So uh, this seed gets planted. How does that start to grow and blossom?
Well, my two pieces of context, the first two,
Right.
Affordable Care Act, HRPA. Here come the final two. A group of, I would say, equally enlightened CHROs. There were five of us, and these are people that I know and think highly of to this day. Back then, Kim Hauer was the head of HR at Caterpillar, a great U.S. based manufacturing firm and a big global company. Macy's, at the time, a very important retailer with lots of frontline and lots of challenges and certainly lots of margin pressure as retail was going through its change in business model. Verizon, and Mark Reed was at Verizon. I should have mentioned Bill Allen was running HR for Macy's at the time, and myself and the five of us created this sort of core team that, for whatever reason, talk about it more if you like, we were ready to go. And so when we talked about the creation of the HTA, I had four partners right there, arm in arm, elbow in elbow with me, and these were big brands. They were important CHROs with clout and with the juice in their company to be able to get their companies to take this path. And those five spawned 15 others, and we had kind of 20 pretty quickly, and we had critical mass. So I would say that was a third part of my context is having great partners who saw this very much the same way as I did, and they were willing to take the risk and take the plunge and jump in. And then the fourth and the final part of the diamond, I think, is Rob Andrews, who's as you know, Lee, he's your leader and he's the CEO of the HTA. You know, we all had jobs. We had big jobs and demanding jobs, and you needed a quarterback. You needed somebody who could actually marshal all this together,
Right.
create an operating entity, and do the heavy lifting to create the HTA. And we had Rob. And so I I really don't think if we were missing one of those 4 points, I'm not sure this would have ever happened.
Mm.
Perfect storm in a good way, you know, perfect moment, really nice alignment, great timing, got a little lucky. I think all those things kind of fed into the creation of the HTA.
So you had these great peers that were there with you, and uh, you had the idea. How did you sell this internally? Because at the time you were working with American Express,
Yep.
and then you have Cat, Macy's, Verizon, IBM. They were all trying to, sell it internally as well. Tell me how that process went.
Another early mover was David Rodriguez, who at the time was the head of HR at Marriott. Now,
Oh,
Marriott,
okay.
again, a very big company with lots and lots of employees to deliver their brand proposition. And I remember David said, as only David can say, this is the no-brainer of the century, this being to join HTA. There was a fairly large entry fee at the time to get in the HTA. And so David was saying the IRR on this is such a no-brainer that you would kind of be sort of foolish not to join if all you cared about was financial returns. This was the financial return of a lifetime. Like we would die to have this kind of return on everything else that we heads of HR manage. So there is a financial side to this that you have to be convinced of. And again, that is not a very hard conversation if you really understand it and think about it. So that was one. Um, I had an inspired head of Total Rewards at the time. Unfortunately, my dear friend David Koshosh passed away. It'll be a year next week following this recording. But David taught me things about advocacy and caring for the employee and the employee experience. And so some CHROs have a difficult conversation with their head of benefits. For one reason or another, their head of benefits might be very comfortable with how things are done today, fairly resistant to change, pretty frictional, allergic. They're not looking for friction or things that make things more complicated or different. Carriers are sometimes very dominant, or benefit consultants are very dominant in how things are done. These are long-standing relationships that are tough to challenge. I didn't have any of that. I had David who was quite willing to go this with me. So I felt like the idea instantly germinated at American Express, and David took it and made it great with his benefits team. So that was important. Fueled by my real belief that at the time American Express had lots of call centers in the United States, lots of people working there. Um, Many of them were single parents, and while we compensated them, I think very fairly, a healthcare expense that was unplanned or unexpected created a crisis for those employees, and
Mm.
I wanted to change that. I never wanted this to be about the bottom line to American Express. I wanted this to be about a better healthcare experience for, I even came up with a name, a persona. Her name was Lucy. She,
Okay.
in my mind, was the personification of a call center single mom who really cared about how much her contribution for healthcare was going to be next year relative to her salary increase. She really cared about out of pocket. She really cared about friction in the healthcare system because she cared deeply about her son, who I even imagined that she had, and maybe he had some special healthcare needs that caused her to be a frequent user of the system. So I always try to keep Lucy really in mind. And in fact, when the core five of us got together in an HR policy association meeting and talked about the next 15 and sort of the path that leads us to where we are today, I stood up and really pushed the Lucy part of the story to touch a heart or two to remind us that we are all advocates for the Lucys that work in our companies. And although this is, David Rodriguez is right, financially, this is a no brainer. For those who aren't completely compelled by that, you either get there on IRR, you get there on Lucy's story, and one or two, and certainly both of those things easily got the job done at American Express. Lee, I have to be honest with you, it was not a heavy lift at all because I felt I had all the facts on my side and I had a partner like David to help operationalize this.
Oh, that's terrific. What risks were there, both professionally and even personally, as you were trying to get something like this off the ground?
Well, I think a lot of my approach to things in general is to try to look at it from the other side of the table, as opposed to getting kind of dogmatic or high and mighty or preachy or something like that. I try to say if somebody's not doing something, there may be a darn good reason why they're not doing something. And I ought to try to understand that as opposed to be upset that they're not seeing it my way. Well, the fact of the matter is, Lee, if you tried to get 5 companies to buy pencils a different way, pencils, or if people even use pencils anymore, that's, well, we've got a contract that goes back 90 million years with
Uh-huh.
this particular pencil company, or we don't use pencils, we actually use pens, or we don't use any of that, we're all electronic. The alignment of well-run, well-managed, very successful companies on anything is hard. You don't see a lot of coalitions, you don't see a lot of cooperatives, you don't see a lot of that for really good reasons. Companies have their own cultures, they have their own interests, they have their own leadership. So to get 2 companies to come together and do something is a feat. 5 companies is impressive. 15 companies incredible. 50 companies, 60 companies. Um, I just appreciate the fact that that's a journey, and every company's got to get there their own way. And as you know personally, it is a constant selling battle to make sure that you get top of mind with the decision makers in an organization, that they understand a very complicated system because this is far from pencils. You can't
Yeah,
really come up with something more complicated than the US healthcare system.
right.
And so I would say the risk or the difficulty was the alignment of distracted, otherwise really well-run companies to do something together. That was not easy. And then this is a little geeky, but this is a legally formed cooperative. The lawyering and the structure of that, and to create an entity that operates as we operate, that is owned by its members as a cooperative, as opposed to a corporation or something like that. Um, again, Rob has a great legal background, and it was pressed into service just to figure out the right way to do this, the right jurisdiction in which to create a co-op. How do you create a co-op that's a nonprofit? Kind of how do you make sure that you're not creating tax realities that are going to be challenging for the HTA and its member companies?
Yeah.
How do you think about data and data protection and data sharing? I mean, it's complicated, but the good thing about that is for prospective member companies, that's all behind us, and we figured all that stuff out. And it's a whole lot easier to get company number 70 than it was to get company number 6.
Oh, no question. You've seen lots of other organizations come together and even come together and disband that have tried to do similar things. I think you've just articulated how hard it is to get alignment between organizations, which maybe explains uh, some of that. What do you think has helped the HTA to be successful in spite of all those headwinds that are everywhere? No, I mean, there's multiple trillions of dollars of reasons why people don't want you to succeed in realignment.
Yeah. Um, I'm thinking of that Carpenters song, "Love Will Keep Us Together." I think it was the Carpenters back in the 70s. That's probably not what's keeping us together. I think that the spirit that we have really tried to operationalize from the beginning, Lee, and I was lucky enough to be the chairman, the founding chairman of the HTA all the way up until I retired from GE a couple months ago. And the very capable Tom Plath is now in that position as my successor. But Rob and I always talked about sort of by the people, for the people, of the people. We really talked about, when we were talking about budgets and operating, this is not our money. We are
Mhm.
custodians. We've been sort of um, granted the permission on behalf of our member companies to put together an operating plan and to spend their money, not to spend our money. Um, that's a really founding principle of this piece that I'm not sure every other entity that you described has.
Mm.
The second one is this substantial amount of transparency. It flows from the first principle. If it's your money, then you ought to understand everything you want to understand about how we operate. We overdo it, I would say, in terms of inclusion and participation. We certainly have bylaws. We certainly live up to those. But if a member company wants to be especially involved in decisions, even beyond what they have a right to as a bylaw, we welcome that. And so I think we get better participation. I think we get a feeling of ownership because they really do own the HTA. We don't own the HTA. Shareholders don't own the HTA. That's really important. And then the way that we work with what you could call vendors or innovators or product creators, we wouldn't take money from other players in the healthcare system because I think it contaminates the purity of what we're trying to do. And even if it's well intended, it's a slippery slope to be sort of sponsored by or subsidized by or funded by players who might have a vested interest in the status quo. And I think we've always been especially careful about that and haven't foot faulted or crossed those lines since we started. So I could go on, Lee, but I think there are some really important, and I think the most important thing I have to say, very intentional design concepts that have led us to be as successful as we've been, though we clearly have miles and miles to go. It's a big hill, and we're just getting started.
I want to explore a little more the dynamic between the CHRO and the head and of total rewards and director of benefits. You mentioned that you had full alignment there up and down, and that was a key part of being able to get this started. As you had other organizations coming on board, what were the interactions like between CHROs who maybe wanted to join HTA and their benefits teams? And in some cases, I imagine there were benefits teams that wanted to join HTA that may not have had a lot of visibility with the CHRO.
Yeah, I think you're right about that we had both conditions going on. Again, helped by that context I mentioned a few minutes ago, I had probably a bigger share of CHROs who were literate in healthcare, interested in healthcare, and sort of willing to take a big leap onto something that we felt like was really important.
Yeah.
I talked a minute ago, I don't want to sort of pick on CHROs who I think are really have huge jobs only getting bigger. I don't want to pick on benefit leads either in this podcast. Benefit leads are responsible for delivering ultimately a customer experience that's pretty tough. They are not in full control of the last mile of healthcare. If a person has a bad experience at a primary care physician, if a person's frustrated, they have to fill out the same clipboard 6 different times in a complicated medical condition. Those are real issues that benefit leads hear about and have to deal with. Many of them operate in multiple states, multiple regions, therefore they have responsibility for multiple healthcare provider systems. We're watching healthcare systems get gobbled up and get consolidated and therefore get sort of stronger in terms of negotiating leverage, clout, et cetera. That is a trend that I believe will only accelerate. It's not going to peak and go back. So they have tough jobs also. And I think their equation about is the gain worth the pain is a calculation that we have to be pretty attentive to. And a CHRO, a benefit leader can say, privately, well, it's easy for them to say. They're not going to get 9,000 calls from employees who are upset that we've changed our PBM or that we've done this or done that. I'm going to get them. And I just think we have to be attentive to that. But back to my relationship with David, we would have some fantastic debates, he and I, but always trying to figure out, at the end of the day, the tiebreaker on the debate was Lucy. The tiebreaker was what's right for our employee. And I think as long as CHROs and benefit leads find their Lucy and think about it that way, they're going to get to the right place.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
There's lots of incumbent actors who have control over data, control over the money, and they want costs to keep going up. And they've been successful at that for 40 years. This is fundamentally the employer's data. If the employers had this data, they would behave very differently. They'd behave better for our society. We need to come up with a tool that gives them the ability to act. I want a new operating model for the U.S. healthcare system. We think there's a need for a foundational piece of software to give consumers control. It's really about empowering employers as consumers to do the right thing.
What were some of the early successes that you had as this got off the ground?
Well, I think the one that I believe rocked the world a little bit in a positive way is when we did the first PBM agreement. I think that was path breaking. I think that was industry changing. Lots of that has been replicated since then, and so I think we had a most favored nation PBM agreement that gave full rebates, pass-throughs back, carve-out rights, and more insight into formulary determination than had ever been seen before. And that provided instant financial benefit. Back to my buddy David Rodriguez, that fact alone and that contract alone made those who participated in it get back multiples of what they ever would have cost to join the HTA. So that was a proof of life to me, Lee. That was a first time we said we can do something collectively you cannot do individually, or that another coalition can't do. We even had coverage in the Wall Street Journal when we did this, and I think it sent a shockwave through the PBM marketplace. And I think they had to figure out these guys are here to stay, and we're going to have to sort of compete with them, or we're going to have to adjust our economics to deal with that. And off they went. So that was a very big win. And then the second one, which is as much fun as digging a ditch, is getting alignment from carriers and PBMs to aggregate data. One of the remaining promises of the HTA that I don't think we fully realized yet, to be frank, is the power of all of this claims data that we have. You know, as a member of the HTA, you are required to contribute your data. To do that, we have to create a system that is acceptable to you to do that. We've done it. But the use of that data for good, the use of that data for smarter buying, the use of that data for comparative anatomy kinds of things, demographic comparisons, that's a big deal to me. To get everybody to agree, like we had these questions about, well, whose data is it? Well, it's the company's data. I mean, it is the company's data, but there were carriers and players who saw that another way. It's our data. We've aggregated it. It's our data. No, it belongs to the company that contributed that data. So we had some headbanging that had to go on there. And as I said, when we got through that, I don't believe anybody celebrated it, perhaps other than Rob, because it was the foundation that laid the path for additional innovation, additional use of that data. Those were the two biggest early wins that I remember, Lee.
That's great. Were there any notable setbacks that popped up that you had to overcome?
It's a little crude, but I would say the free rider effect. You know, this is a co-op, you know, and in the spirit of a co-op means we're all in this together. And there were companies that were really willing to be leaders, really willing to take risks, really willing to take a first mover position on things. And there were members that were really free riders. Hang back. I'll take if we're building a farming cooperative, like I'll take the peaches when they come off the tree, but don't call me when it's time to plant the plants or fertilize it or pick it in the hot sun. But I will be happy to have a higher quality peach at a lower price. I'll take that. But the work that goes into it, you can't have it both ways. So I think we had to deal with some of that. We actually had to let go an early member, not one of the ones I've mentioned, but a very big household name that everybody on this podcast would know, who just believed that they didn't need to contribute data in spite of the agreement that we reached and that we all signed. For one reason or another, they just were not willing to contribute their data into it. Now, it's a bold decision to fire a member of a co-op, but that's essentially what we needed to do. And those types of steps are necessary to maintain the integrity and the spirit of the co-op and the transparency we talked about, those were, at a time when we were not as financially comfortable as we are today, to walk away from, a customer, so to speak, a fee, a set of fees is a gutsy thing to do, but it's a principled thing to do, and we did it.
As we look a little bit towards the future, what do you think is the best way that we might continue to engage and captivate CHROs to take a more active stance in healthcare? Admitting again, as you've said, they have a ton of other priorities, many of which are firmly put in place by directors, CEO, CFO, and also healthcare is intimidating. It's super complex, and most people in that lead executive role have not had deep tactical experience with it, and they don't have the benefit of the Obamacare being on every news channel every day, all the time. So as now the world has changed a little bit in that regard, what do you think about reaching out and engaging more CHROs in the cause?
Well, I don't think I've got a silver bullet, unfortunately, Lee, but I do have a couple things to say that might be marginally helpful. Years ago, someone asked me. I was back at Pepsi when this happened. Somebody asked me to give a presentation to their function. This is not an HR function, on how to work with general managers. And I showed a picture that you might find in a biology book of a human brain. And I said, this is the brain of a general manager. And I said, look at all of the things that they are balancing and juggling right now: market share, profitability, customer concerns, pricing concerns, competitive issues. I said, this is what this poor general manager is thinking about. I said, and I pointed this little sliver of the brain that I said is human capital. I said, I always approached a general manager assuming that they were very busy, on very legitimate topics. And I tried to make that little slice, let's say it was 5%. I tried to make that 5% count. I tried to be really efficient with their time, really clear in what I was asking them to do, and make that as easy to do as they possibly could, frankly, out of respect for the challenge of their job. I would say we ought to think about CHROs the same way. Instead of the general manager brain, put the CHRO brain in there. And they also are being pulled in 100 different directions, as we've talked about. So of the 5% you might have a right to around healthcare or something like that, you've got to make that 5% count. You got to make it count with case studies, with scenarios, with vignettes that say, this is what other members are experiencing. This could be your reality also. The last thing I would say is, to sequentially do this, talk to a CHRO privately, and then perhaps talk to a benefit lead. I think you put yourself in a long sales cycle, lots of do loops, and you'll likely not get anything out of that approach. I would collectively approach. I'd look for time in a meeting with the CHRO and their head of total rewards and their head of benefits, if they're structured that way. And I say, I want to meet the three of you at the same time in the same room. And I want to talk about where we're coming from financially, where we're coming from employee experience wise, how this could line up with what you're trying to do, and get the objections out on the table when you're in a room, when someone from the HTA is in a room, to kind of hear them and address them, versus the sort of drip, drip, drip that I'm afraid sort of dies of its own weight.
In your experience, we've seen cases where, call them activist benefits directors, have taken bold steps to help improve healthcare without necessarily a lot of buy-in from the organization. In some instances, they'll even do it at professional risk because no one's asking them to do it, but they think it's the right thing. And we laud some of them as heroes, but man, it shouldn't have to be that way. And also on the other side, sometimes CHROs have a vision, but it's for many different reasons. They don't have the staff or the resources, whatever it might be, to make a difference. What do you think is the great outcome or the advantage to that activist benefits director if they can do some of the hard work to manage up and bring their CHRO along? Because a lot of them, they're busy and they may think that it's not that important, and they may not even give it a try. And I think part of it is they may not know how good the world could look if the CHRO is involved. And I know you've seen a lot of dyads where you do have alignment there, and was wondering if you could share some of the reasons a benefit director ought to give that a try.
Well, I maybe two chapters of that answer, Lee. The first one is accept the bell curve. Like in any business context I've ever been in, maybe in any life context, there is a bell curve. And there is a small but very important group, numerically small, of what you might call the risk takers, the entrepreneurs, the first movers. They go by lots of
Mhm.
names, but God bless them because they are the tip of the spear and they pave the way for others. So I'd be looking for those people, and out of 100, you're probably going to be lucky if you find 7.
Yeah.
Then you get to the other end of the curve, and let's say that's 7 too. These folks are never ever moving for any number of reasons, and you are wasting your breath and your time on trying to get them to do that.
Hmm.
I just wouldn't put my time over there. You're playing for the middle. You're playing for the very large, 70% or something like that, that can be influenced either way. They can either be pulled to the front or they can be kind of pulled to the rear. And that's how you're thinking about this. So I would sort of segment the population and begin to determine who you're working with and adjust your approach accordingly. That's one. And then secondly, if you've heard me talk on other subjects before, I'm a big guy on purpose. What is your purpose? And so now I'm directly answering your question to the benefit lead. I'm a fan of writing that purpose down, not your goals and objectives for every year, not your life's purpose in the world, but your purpose as the leader of benefits. And the way I ask that question is, when you're gone, retired, what will they look back on? How will they know you were there? Like, what change will you made? And maybe legacy is a word you're okay using. What will be your legacy when you're no longer in that job? And to me, if you're a person who's just kind of managed the status quo, I don't think there's a lot of credit you're going to get for that. I don't think there's a lot of reward you're going to get for that. I think you'll keep your job, and that might be enough for some part of that bell curve. But I think the joy comes from, you know, taking a swing, trying to create something new. Those heroes that you talked about in your question, Lee, thank heavens for them because they realize things are broken and they're really ready to experiment. And one of the things I like about HTA that we haven't quite focused directly on, so it's a good chance for me to talk about that. Two heads are better than one. You know, bumping bumping off the innovation of company A makes company B better, and company B might actually push company A's thinking a little bit. This is how innovation happens in this world. This is how Silicon Valley prospers. This is incubators and crucibles that are created where you have these mashups where ideas get perfected and they get advanced and they get scaled more quickly than if you're just trying to go it alone in your own company. It's easier to do in your own company because you don't have all those alignment issues that I was complaining about a while ago. It's easier. But if you want to really swing for the fence and if you really want to be part of maybe a person who might have changed the trajectory of healthcare, not just in your company, but in the employer provided world, HTA provides this instant incubator um, for something like that to happen. And that's a reason professionally from a career growth, career development standpoint, that's another great reason for a benefit lead to want to be part of the HTA. You know, be with the best in the industry and think more broadly than you might be able to think within your own company.
I think that's sometimes a missed advantage also of working together, is that you need to have access to great peers. We've
Yeah,
we've always known that one of the best sort of benefits that you can offer a new hire is great coworkers, and one of the best things we can offer as a cooperative to activist, mission-driven individuals who want to make a change is access to other people who believe and feel the same way.
Lee, and you do this really well, and so do your colleagues. This might be a happy little secret, but the HTA is not huge in terms of staff. We don't have dozens and dozens of people that are paid salaried members of the HTA. So what you end up doing, your force multiplier play, is to curate a group of like-minded people and take advantage of their teams sometimes and take advantage of their resources sometimes and point them in a positive direction. And again, you do this, and your colleagues at the HTA do this. So you're exactly right. It's a force multiplier play that I think is essential to the future of the HTA and healthcare.
Yeah. Now, looking at a CHRO who might be interested in improving healthcare, they've got a tiny sliver of their time and brain and attention they can do on this. They definitely don't have enough time to become an expert because healthcare is so big and complicated. What advice might you give to a CHRO who wants to start making a difference with even just a modicum of the time they might be able to spend on it?
Well, it's not necessary that the CHRO herself joins the HTA, that they are invited to, that there are board positions available. I don't think these are particularly heavy lifts, but if somebody is that interested and wants to spend that time, we have people like Christy Pambianchi at Intel doing that today. And Christy certainly has a large, complicated company that she's very much on the front foot of. So there's an opportunity to get that involved. Otherwise, I would encourage CHROs to take that sliver and say, what is it that you are not satisfied with in your status quo? Give me one thing. Give me two things. That's it. And consider the HTA as a potential solution path with your team, not to your team, but with your team. What's great about this co-op design is the products and services that the HTA develops, innovates, invents, comes up with are not mandatory. It's like a buffet, and an employer can buy 1, 2, and 5 and skip 3 and 4 if they feel like that's what's right for their organization. So I think we've got some flexibility about how to do that, but a CHRO ought to get, healthcare is a huge subject. Neck that down to what do you really care about as it relates to healthcare, and how can the HTA potentially help you with that? And as I mentioned earlier, bring your TR, your total rewards lead, and or your benefit lead, bring them with you and do this as a partnership versus sort of a one over one piece, because then you get back to the chiropractic.
Yeah.
You get a lot of alignment to do, and it's not easy to do when you're busy.
If you could paint the future any way you like, what would you like to see or hope to see in the next 3 to 5 years, both for the HTA, but also more broadly in employer healthcare?
I take no credit for what I'm about to say, because people who've been in the system a while, they know this like the back of their hand. We still pay for service. We don't pay for value or outcomes. And if you can kind of simplify it down to that in this country, the financial systems and the alignment issues we talked about largely mean that sort of the more you treat, the more you prescribe, the more often you see, the more profit is generated. It is I was thinking the U.S. healthcare system should win a Nobel Prize, for innovation. You think about the great companies that we have that develop these miraculous uh, pharma compounds, or the biogenetic advances that are going on right now, or the medical treatment or the medical devices. I mean, it is special how much of that these great companies provide. They have capital, they have deep pockets, they have loads of talent, they have some of the greatest minds that were working on this stuff. So give the U.S. a Nobel Prize for that. Give us a booby prize for the way that we actually align all of that and deliver it to Lucy. But we actually deserve nothing but criticism for how we have sort of taken all of that great innovation all the way to market. And that's where I think the HTA could change the game.
What are you doing next at this phase of your career? And if you're open to it, how might people connect with you if they, if there's alignment, or they might want to be able to engage with you in some other service?
Well, I happily retired from GE in April of this year, and have spent the last 4 months kind of trying to figure that question out, Lee. I'm trying to take it slow. I do have a firm, LKC Advisory is sort of what it's known as, and I'm mostly involved in helping to either companies think about succession at the very senior most levels of the company, CHROs who are interested in advice and counsel beyond which they are kind of currently getting, helping to try to find the right matchmaking between needy CEOs, demanding CEOs, and talented heads of HR, and thinking a lot about the future of HR. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And if somebody wants to reach out to me, certainly reachable through LinkedIn. And I've got the time right now, which is really great, um, to play the field a little bit. And I've had great conversations this week with someone in Singapore, last week with somebody in Japan, and also this week with lots of people in the United States. And it's wonderful to be able to kind of sort that through and say, can I help?
Mm.
Sometimes I can, and sometimes I know somebody who's better suited to help you, and I can direct traffic a little bit. That's what I'm trying to spend my time on right now. Hopefully, not flunking retirement, but it's fun to stay active, and it's fun to think about things like this with you, Lee, and I really appreciate the chance to do it today.
Oh, no, it's been my pleasure. This has been extremely rewarding. Thank you so much for spending the time today. And for all of you listening, if you found this helpful as I did, please consider sending this to a colleague or friend, to your benefits director or a CHRO. And with that, thanks for joining Broken Benefits, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on Broken Benefits. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, please share today's show with a friend or colleague. It's free to do, and it helps us spread the message to as many people as possible.